listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
The Bongo family's 56-year rule over Gabon. A military intervention appears set to end the Bongo family's 56 years hold to power in Gabon. A group of senior military officers announced yesterday that they had seized power shortly after President Ali Bongo Ondimba was declared winner of the country's recently held presidential poll. For insight into this, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. One of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled Revolting Capital Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
So the coup leaders claim the August 26th general election was not credible. They announced a cancellation of the election result, closure of all borders, and dissolution of all state institutions, including the legislative arm of government. Dr. Horne, it does appear we can't count our chickens before they hatch. Realize that. It is appearing as we sit here right now that France is losing its grip on its neo-colonial endeavors as it relates to Niger and now what we see happening in Gabon. That would indicate to me that the United States is losing its grip, haven't said lost, is losing its grip by their inability to intervene in Niger. Is that a signal that you're receiving, or are there other features in this film that that have yet to be unveiled, and we need to get some more popcorn and sit back and watch?
Well, I think the plot is still unfolding. I've noticed that there are revelations about the leader of the regime change in Gabon, the man we know as General Brice Nguema, is a property holder in the Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm. Notably Hyattsville and Silver Spring, which, as you know more than most, are upmarket, upscale neighborhoods. I think that it's possible that what we may be witnessing, and I underline possible, is a transition from French neo-colonialism to U.S. imperialism. Now, that's not inevitable. It may be a transition from French neo-colonialism to a bright new horizon where Gabon follows South Africa and Zimbabwe and looking eastward towards China, towards the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But note that if that former proposition proves to be accurate, it would not be the first time. Recall that when Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in Ghana in 1966, that was a landmark on the transition from British colonialism, the traditional power, to U.S. imperialism. Recall that when John F. Kennedy, a junior senator from Massachusetts, was being catapulted into prominence, one of the planks in his platform was seeking to undermine French imperialism in Algeria. As you know, Algeria comes to independence in 1962, shortly after Kennedy is elected. Now, as it turns out, Algeria took a different route. That is to say, just because France was ousted did not necessarily mean that the United States would take its place. But certainly that is a possibility we can't rule out. And as we've said a number of times on this program, if you look at Niger, you see that as the French ambassador is under siege, a U.S. ambassador has been parachuted into Niamey, just as there have been raucous demonstrations at the French base in Niger, no such demonstrations at the U.S. base in Niger. And I would also point your audience to Togo. This neighbor of Ghana bears an eerie resemblance to the Bongo dictatorship in Gabon insofar as you had a father, Adeyemi, replaced by a son, Adeyemi. They've been ruling for decades. And recall that an early leader of that West African nation, speaking of Togo, was Sylvanus Olympia, who was a man who was akin to the so-called Americo-Liberians, that is to say, the Black Americans who migrated 200 years ago and moved into the nation we now know as Liberia. Well, he had roots in Brazil. Listeners might be aware that you had Black Brazilians who also moved to West Africa. In fact, they still play a prominent role in the Nigerian economy. But having said that, I do think that it's possible that a contagion is at play, a contagion of regime changes. We've already made reference to 89, 90-year-old Paul Biya in neighboring Cameroon. We've made reference to the Nguema family in Equatorial Guinea. Recall that during the bad old days of the U.S. wars in Indochina, Washington oftentimes spoke of a so-called domino theory. That is to say, if Vietnam was to be, quote, lost to the communists, then that would have knock-on effects in Laos and Cambodia, et cetera. Well, actually, that did not necessarily prove to be accurate, but certainly there might be a domino theory at play with regard to former French colonies. It may not be coincidental that there is this genuine mass uprising, revulsion towards French neo-colonialism, with the Bongo family being the latest victims of this contagion. And we should also pay attention to other parts of Africa and try to draw appropriate lessons from their histories. Recall that in Mozambique and Southeast Africa, you had a liberation movement, Frelimo, coming to power in 1975, socialist-oriented. They were then tormented by the predecessor state of Zimbabwe. Speaking of Rhodesia, the Central Intelligence Organization of Rhodesia launched a guerrilla war against Mozambique, then was taken up by the apartheid regime in South Africa. That guerrilla force, so-called, the Renamo, the Mozambique National Resistance, specialized in terror, kidnapping, cutting off lips and noses, until finally they weakened Mozambique to the point where it did not necessarily triumphal, but certainly it was not able to embark upon its ambitious socialist plans. And you had a similar process unfold in Angola, due south of Gabon, where a Cuban intervention helped to rescue the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. This was unsatisfying to both apartheid South Africa and its U.S. ally, and they sponsored a guerrilla campaign there, not unlike the campaign in Mozambique. And I'm afraid to say that campaign, symbolized by the sellout leader, Jonas Savimbi, fortunately killed some years ago, it was backed by a number of Black Americans, just like you have in Gabon. Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, carrying a passport of Gabon as we speak. So this situation in Gabon is very fluid. It's difficult to say how it will shake out. I am optimistic, particularly given the growing strength of the BRICS, providing an option for African nations, not only South Africa, but also Egypt and Ethiopia most recently. We expect Algeria to accede to the BRICS sooner rather than later. So this is a movie that is still unwinding, although I think it's possible to be cautiously optimistic.
All UN sanctions against Mali will end on August 31st after Russia vetoed the proposal by France and the UAE to have them extended. The Franco-Emirati draft would have extended both the sanctions and the mandate of the UN expert group charged with monitoring Mali through August and September of 2024, respectively. Your thoughts, Dr. Horne?
Well, this is a reflection of my optimistic scenario. That is to say, Mali, one of those former French colonies, has been in open revolt against French neo-colonialism and has threatened to intervene on behalf of the regime in Niger in case there is some sort of external intervention, is clearly moving ever closer to Moscow. You might have seen that the Malian top leadership paid a visit to St. Petersburg in Russia during the Africa-Russia summit that took place there. So once again, it's too soon to tell whether Gabon will follow in the footsteps of Mali. But if I were in the Republic of the Congo, recall that there are two Congos, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the sprawling nation bigger than Western Europe, where U.S. imperialism liquidated the independence leader Patrice Lumumba and, continuing the theme, effectively supplanted Belgium, which had been the neo-colonial and colonial ruler. Well, the Republic of the Congo has been French-dominated, but it had a more sophisticated working class. During the days of the Cold War, it was ruled by the Congolese Party of Labor, which pledged to pursue socialism, as I said, that invited delegations from the Black Panther Party and other black militants from the United States. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, that all went down the drain. And now, I dare say that given the fact that there is this contagion spreading throughout Africa, if I were in the Republic of the Congo, if I were in Brazzaville, I would be looking over my shoulder. Particularly, I would be looking over my shoulder at the military, because Mali and Niger, and to an extent Burkina Faso as well, have set out an alternative path for former French colonies.
Dr. King reminded us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. As we look at what's happening right now in Gabon, French neo-colony backed by the United States, Niger, French neo-colony backed by the United States. You mentioned Indochina, which we know is Vietnam, French neo-colony French colony backed by the United States, Haiti. We see these turnabout in events. Is this evidence of Dr. King telling us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice?
Well, I appreciate the sentiment embedded in an aphorism. But as a student of history, I know that there is not only a phenomenon known as revolution, there is a phenomenon known as counter-revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And we who have been victims of enslavement on these shores should be all too familiar with the process of counter-revolution. We saw it after the U.S. Civil War, when the promise of Reconstruction was drowned in a tidal wave of blood by the Ku Klux Klan. We see it today when you see mass murder taking place in Buffalo and in Jacksonville, implicitly egged on by the highest authorities of the state. I'm looking at you, Governor DeSantis. So Dr. King himself was a victim of counter-revolution. Certainly his assassination in April 1968 was an attempt to squelch and squash the progressive and radical sentiments that he had helped to unleash. And that was not altogether successful, but I dare say that it was not totally unsuccessful. So we should continue to appreciate and understand the legacy of Dr. King, but we may want to add a footnote to that quotable aphorism.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.